Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of The Sweet House. Today I am sitting down with Kerry Osborn, the Director of Member Experience at NOCD, the leading telehealth provider in OCD and related conditions. And Kerry has a phenomenal story. And so that's why she's here today, because it's such an important message that I feel like all of us need to hear. And her journey started as she recovered from a traumatic car experience and became a beacon of hope for a lot of people and who are battling OCD. And your whole journey is just nothing short of remarkable. After reading some excerpts from this book, you are truly a survivor. I feel like we need to cue Beyonce and Destiny's Child and talk all about it.
You're not wrong.
Because you've definitely risen above quite a few things. And it's just beautiful to see. And I've been sitting here talking to her for the past few minutes, and she articulates all of this so well that I think even people without OCD will be able to support other people who may have it, but also just have a greater understanding of what it's like to live and deal with it. So I want to get right to it because you have so much that we can really talk about.
Yeah.
So can you walk us through your initial thoughts and feelings after you had that traumatic car crash that really changed the trajectory of your life?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was 17 at the time, and I had never had any sort of mental health issues, nothing. I had a very normal upbringing, and I was in a really bad car accident at the end of high school. And I was the only one who wasn't physically very injured. Everyone else was. But it's kind of interesting because right about the time that they were healing and getting out of the hospital was when my disorder was setting in.
Yeah.
And I think it's really interesting because people don't realize out of these traumatic situations that even like something physical like a car accident can cause psychological warfare for the rest of your, OCD is chronic. I have it for life now. It's manageable now, but it's just an interesting topic. You think of car accidents and you think of something physical, but I was in a really bad car accident. And then about 3 months later, my mom and dad said that they had a different daughter. And at the time that meant nothing to me because I couldn't see in front of me. I couldn't really tell any differences. But ultimately what was happening was I started to get these intrusive thoughts and urges out of nowhere, but they were so faint in the beginning that it wasn't like I'm hearing voices or anything like that. It was just myself. And it was just kind of like these intrusive thoughts out of nowhere about things that really mattered to me. And in order to combat those intrusive thoughts, I kind of naturally responded with what I now know are compulsions, but really they were just erratic behaviors that made no sense. So like, for example, I have long blonde hair, and at the time that was a security blanket for me. In high school, you care so much about what you look like. And I felt like I didn't really have a lot going for me other than this blanket of blonde hair that I hid behind. Still do. And so I remember like that was the first thing I noticed was the OCD attacking my hair. And I started brushing my hair one day and noticed there was too much hair in the hairbrush. And I realized I'd never even like looked at my hairbrush before. So I don't even know, but it just all of a sudden it was
now
just
you're
like
conscious.
That's too much hair. And turns out I actually was losing more hair. I think it was hormones turning 17, like all of that, but maybe something from the car accident. But I started to like obsess about it and obsess in a really negative way because I'd be like, I just lost, I'd count the hairs in my hairbrush and just do things like that. And then it translated into erratic behaviors like if I put this Cheez-It under my pillow, then like I'm going to lose less hair. Or like I would see a picture of myself balding.
Did you recognize that they were erratic behaviors, or did somebody start to point them out?
It was my parents that did. It was so intuitive and natural to me and so slow that it was a slow burn and progression. Yeah. So it wasn't until my parents were like, whoa, what is this going on here? And they would say things like, pick that up. And I wouldn't. And that's when we were like, something's going on.
And so prior to this car crash, you had not experienced any sort of mental challenges or just barriers that you feel would have contributed to the onset of OCD?
No, I think that I was always a bit of a rigid person growing up. Like when I think back, I know like when I was writing the book, I really had to reflect back on even my childhood. Like, did I have OCD tendencies growing up that then resulted in the disorder setting in? Yeah. Because it did set in right around that age where OCD sets in for a lot of people. But there's no real thing any one of us can pinpoint other than the car accident.
Yeah. And that's when you notice the major behavioral changes.
Yep.
So you mentioned that the injuries were more psychological for you than physical. And so can you elaborate on on how this realization impacted like your recovery process? Because I know you were probably in touch with your other friend, with your friend that was in the car with you who did have physical ailments.
Yes.
And so what was that like? Because usually after something like this happens, especially when you're with your friends, you're calling them and you're like, well, girl, are you feeling this way too? Like, what's going on? So what was that like?
Interesting question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at first, we were like attached at each other's hips. I wouldn't leave the hospital. I wouldn't leave her bed when she went home. But at that time, again, it took about 3 months to set in. Yeah. And she was actually a year older than me. So she was graduating and going off to college. So I think that there was some animosity. I know there was, I think, between our families because of the way the car accident happened. It was her fault. And some of the people were horrifically injured and children. And so I think there's a lot of resentment with my family now looking back because this has affected me now my entire life, but she's healed. So she went off to college and honestly, we stopped being in touch. So she didn't hear about the psychological effects until my book came out and reached out to me and realized that she felt horrible, you know, even though it wasn't her fault, but you know, it just goes to show you.
How do you cope with something like that? And it's, you know, it's a challenging thing, especially when you're a teenager and now we're professional adults or, you know, 30
so many years ago.
Yeah. So I love that first of all, that you both are still here and, and that no one, there weren't casualties, but obviously physical and mental impairments. And so I think it is so brave of you to be able to have those conversations. So I always tell people when they come to the Sweet House that we're going to give them their flowers. And I am giving you your flowers, first of all, because you wrote this incredible book, The Obsessive Outsider, that you all need to check out because I've literally marked it up here, but then also because you're just so transparent about your healing journey and how that moment has impacted you. So
thank you.
Yes, giving you your flowers because that's
Thanks
brave.
for the flowers.
Yeah, not the physical flowers, but just, you know, the emotional flowers of it.
The accolade.
So, the accolade of it. Yeah, because the assurance that like what you're doing is definitely. I also think that conversation that you've had with her was probably somewhat healing for both of you.
It was. It stopped me in my tracks. But because she had gone off to college and we kind of lost touch, it wasn't just over the car accident, but for her to acknowledge, I held in, I think, a lot of resentment through the years that I was the sickest after the accident. She didn't know about any of that. We lived separate lives by then. So it was healing when I think a piece of media came out coming up for my book tour with Barnes & Noble, and she reached out to me through Facebook and was like,
I'm sorry.
I had no idea this is what you went through, but I was mortified. I wasn't going to blame it on her like my family was and things like that. And you
were young too.
Totally.
And I just wonder, looking back on it in retrospect, would you have told her of your experience? Or do you even feel like you have the capacity, being new to who you are as someone who's dealing with OCD, to share that with her at the time?
I don't think so, because I don't think that she would have been receptive or understanding. Again, this was 2007 and 8. And especially at that age of like, you're so vulnerable at 17. You want to put your best foot forward. I don't like mental health was not a discussion.
No,
in
not
that.
at all.
Like, so it was very private.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I think she would have probably like laughed or made it into a joke or not. She would not have understood, especially since we didn't live in the same state anymore. I think it was better to have it come out this way, without placing the blame there, but it was a result. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I want to talk about a moment that you wrote about in your book.
Okay.
That was really interesting to me. It's the part where you say the car wreck has just happened.
Okay.
And you make it to the other side of the road or the grassy knoll.
Yep.
And so the part before this, you guys just have to read, but where she's sitting in the car and the car is on fire. I mean, again, you have a sense of bravery and strength in you that I don't know if you realize is to be commended. So when I was reading that part of you just even making it across the street to the grassy knoll, there's something in you that says, is it the Holy Spirit? What is it in you that gets you across this street? Yeah. And so I want to read this excerpt, and then I want to talk about how faith has played a role in your healing too. So she says in this book, as soon as I touched the grass, I collapsed. I still hadn't been able to take a breath. It was as though I had the airway of a straw, but couldn't suck in as much as nearly half of a straw. As I collapsed on the grass, my blurry eyes saw the outline of a familiar frame and face running towards me. Who was he? I know him. How do I know him? The thought trailed off. Before I knew it, he was hovering over me and he began to pray over me. It couldn't be. This familiar man was the pastor of my church. Allow me to set the scene and narrow down the irony of this 100% true miracle for you. We had crashed near the outskirts of the most deserted part of the park where people rarely are. It was tiny grass knoll in between office buildings and parking lots. My pastor had been walking on the bike trail and happened to be passing the exact nook of our crash at the very moment I was running from the car. He was sent by God to save my life. The best part, he knew exactly who I was, knew my mother, and immediately called her. So we cannot predict the things that are going to happen to us in our life and who's going to be there at that time. And what was that like to be in this moment where I'm sure you're shook and just in disbelief that any of this has even happened? You just ran from a burning car and then you're laying there and your pastor, like, and as you said, in this deserted area is standing over you. So what did that feel like? Did you feel, first of all, what got you out of that car and across the street when you were feeling like you could not breathe?
Yeah.
Is that a Holy Spirit experience? What is that?
Yes. I wholeheartedly believe that. For me, I didn't think when I was trying to get out of the car. I mean, I was jammed in there. There was no way out. It was on fire. It was blowing up while we were in it. And if I see blood, I faint. And so it used to be even way worse. And I knew that the shards of the glass of the window had gone into her arm. And so I knew, because of what she was screaming and saying, I knew that if I looked at her, I would faint and I would probably pass, because the engine was blowing. It was an older Range Rover. But it was much older. So it was like not made for like cars are today. So it was guttural, instinctual survival mode. And I think I climbed out of the trunk. I don't even know how I ran across. I mean, I was running across a highway. And I really mean in the middle of nowhere. Like where that path was that he was walking on with a friend. And I remember, because I couldn't breathe like at all. And that was probably the scariest part. I just have flashbacks of where I remember smacking, once I got through the traffic, just like hitting the grass and looking up, and I was dizzy and I couldn't breathe. But the head that was hovering over me was like starting to come into focus. But I
did it
like,
feel real? Did you?
You know, it did. It did feel real. It did. I was like, I just kept thinking like, I'm alive. Like, am I alive? I know that I can't breathe, but like, and I probably have internal bleeding and damage, but like, I'm here. And I think I was just very confused because when I saw him, it didn't make sense to me until afterwards, but he kind of just started praying over me. And I remember he was above me this way. And so I was looking up and he just started praying. I have no idea what he said. And then he stepped away and called my mom. And my mom came like a bat out of hell and drove on a sidewalk. And I just needed my mom, I think, to keep breathing.
Oh, for sure.
And like when I saw her face, like it was like, how did she get here? Like
there's nothing like a mom's
It was like
instinct.
before the paramedics.
Yeah.
I was like,
oh, girl, if somebody calls me about my daughter, I tell people all the time, I will canoe across the Atlantic Ocean and probably die on the way
100%
to get to Rain, because that's a mom's instinct.
Such a mama bear too.
Yeah.
She's like, when she tells it from her point of view that she turned the corner and just saw this black smoke that was taking up our whole town and just so much traffic. And I think she ran like half a mile in order to, but she guided
didn't even know she could run like that.
I don't think she did. I really don't. But if he wasn't there I remember her saying to me, like, if he hadn't called her and said, confirmed I was alive and like somewhat okay, and she saw the scene she saw, she doesn't know if she would have been able to like
get there.
Yeah, like she had motivation because she knew I was alive.
Right.
And so that is just such a miracle in itself that because I wasn't really actively committed to going to church at the time.
Yeah.
My pastor knew who I was, but it wasn't like I was super strong in my faith at the time or anything. And
you didn't
so
have like a very rigid religious journey.
No, but it was a nudge from God, I believe.
Yeah.
And
did that change your life after the traumatic accident? Did you feel like you gave more of yourself to religion? And
not at the time. Again, like this is 15 years worth of journey and growth and maturing. I don't even think I really put the pastor connection together till I wrote the book, which was years after the accident, because I had to go get help and, get better to even write a book. Like I couldn't even write at the time because my OCD got so bad. So I think it was really when I started to put the book pieces together that I realized like this miracle actually happened. But no, it wasn't like clear as day at the time. Like, I'm, this
like
was a God
saw the
thing.
light. Yeah.
Yeah. It wasn't like that at the time. But I'm so glad that I'm now able to give credit where credit is due now.
Absolutely. Well, I love that part of the story, and it's definitely a part, you guys, that gives you the chills, because it was definitely a God thing that he was there for sure.
Totally.
And so you've come from California, and now you are in the heat of Tennessee, which is also the Bible Belt. So you will have a pastor praying over you at every corner in Tennessee. So welcome to Nashville. So you guys just know that about Nashville. There's somebody praying over you on every corner.
Yeah,
so.
but in California in 2000, that was so rare.
Yeah.
So like someone might read this now and go, well, but that was not normal. That was not a thing, which even makes that. Now
even
that I live in Tennessee
anomaly.
and I've experienced like the Bible Belt
and journeys here.
And the churches here, I remember my first time standing in a church here, I was like, these people are going ham. Like,
it's a different experience here.
And now I'm so into it and in with it.
Have you found a church home here?
I did find a church that I really, really liked. But I'm like open to looking
around.
But I did.
Well, there's somewhere for everybody. And I also think faith journeys are just predicated to sometimes on the things that we go through in our lives, like those moments. And it might not be something that you initially recognize. It could be something 10, 15 years down the road when you're able to articulate it in a book that then you say, you see how far you've grown on your own spiritual journey. So thank you for also sharing that part.
Of course.
I do want to talk about faith and also psychology, because a lot of times, especially growing up in the South, we're told just to pray about it. If you're going through something, if we go to our parents and I think Aaron and Sean and all of us, they grew up in Memphis, all of us, this is the Bible Belt. You tell your parents something's going on, they're going to tell you just to pray about it. And
Wow,
so,
okay.
but you're from California, that may be a different experience,
Totally.
but it's a cultural thing down south. And so how does somebody contend with the things that they are dealing with from a mental perspective when it comes to a faith journey, or when to actually get some help? How do they contend, or is it something that intertwines?
It did not intertwine for me. Like I said, this experience, it's been culture shock moving to Tennessee and experiencing that. And now I love it and it's so normal.
Yeah.
But back then people didn't say, there was no pray about it. I mean, there's also such a stigma on something is wrong with her. I think at the time you rely on your family and your friends.
Yeah.
And I didn't think I needed help. That's the thing. This was very a natural progression.
A new thing for you.
Yeah, like I wasn't like something's wrong. Like in my brain, it wasn't like that's weird. I'm wondering why I'm like leaving pieces of food all over the house and like not
almost
brushing
like
my
you're
hair.
outside yourself.
Yeah, like I was just living within it. So I'm in a position where if it wasn't for my parents, I don't think I'd be here today.
Yeah.
Because they were the ones who fought for me to get the help. And I know not everyone has that luxury.
Yeah.
But I mean, up until for years, they are the ones who paved the path for me, or else I would, they were like, if you're going to live within our walls and you want to go to college and you want to be a part of this family, then you're not going to uproot our lives because of what happened to you. And so I think there's also, everyone has a different family dynamic, but mine was just, all I really had was my parents at that time. It wasn't something to discuss with friends. I wasn't not sharing it. I didn't know there was anything to share, to be honest with you.
Yeah. I love that you keep reiterating that, because it is also very transparent in the fact that you just did not realize that you were actually going through this, even though you were going through it. And so I think that's the underlying importance of OCD. Your mind has not allowed you to actually see it because you're in it. And so you keep saying like, I didn't recognize it. I didn't recognize it. Other people were pointing it out. Yeah. So that's also like something I feel like the audience definitely needs to know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I think it's a testament to the trust. Also, the people who love you the most and surround you the most oftentimes can see things that you're a little bit blinded to. And
were you receptive?
No. No, not at all.
So what do you say to, as your role with NOCD, what do you say to families and friends who are trying to be supportive and they almost feel like giving up for somebody who's just not receptive?
Absolutely. I talk to those families all the time. And I wish I had, and I tell them, I wish I had an easier answer for you, because a lot of times families like mine, an age of consent in adulthood is really the biggest barrier, because you can't do much as a parent when your child is 18. And so, and even before they're 18, like even I was not receptive to therapy. So my parents would like schedule appointments for me and psychologist testing and psychiatrists and therapists. And I would show up because I knew I had to, but I was calling bluff internally.
Right.
And so I like to also share that with families so that they know, because my family thought I was like resisting on purpose. But it wasn't them I was resisting against. And a lot of times families perceive it as,
this person is just going against the grain.
Right. They're going against us as a family.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like we're your parents. We're trying to help you. We see something's wrong.
Why don't you get it? It's like they want to shake you.
Right.
Like, what's going on?
When you're the one going through, what I try to do with these families is put them in the mindset of the person who has OCD. And it's just like addiction and alcoholism also, where you really truly aren't going to get that help until you're ready.
Yeah.
And you cannot for someone to be ready. My parents tried for years
Mm-hmm.
to get me the best of the best, the help, this and that. And I didn't think that what I was going through was summed up by a disorder. It was a lifestyle for me at that point. And so, unfortunately, you can't do much until that person hits their breaking point, which is really sad because sometimes the breaking point can be
really far down the line.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what I do is I usually tailor it to the situation of the kind of where's the resistance of their child at this time. And a lot of times, like what we do at NOCD is we have a lot of peers, people who have OCD and have gone through exposure and response prevention therapy, which is the golden standard treatment for OCD, and come out and like live a life now that is unbelievably different than when they were plagued with OCD. And we have conversations with the members themselves. So if you're 15 or you want to talk to a male and you're a male and sometimes they're willing to open up.
They're relational.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that conversation of like, hey, I just want to tell you, like, I was actually 17 at the time also. And this is what happened. I was resistant and I'm able to talk about that. It actually can help inspire the patient, the member to go, okay, well, if it worked for this girl and I trust her. And that's why the book was so important to me also, is it was like, trust me, read the gritty, awful sides of my story, because it does get so much worse than even what we've discussed so far. And there's no way you won't trust me once you actually read it.
Yeah.
And then part 2 of the book is what to actually do about it, how to actually go get help.
Yeah.
If you think something might be wrong.
Yeah. Well, I think you're doing miracle work.
Thank you.
I would call it miracle work.
Thank you so much.
Because you're dealing with something that I think a lot of people would deem is like unfathomable. And so you being able to communicate across who the patients or the people who are actually dealing with it, but then also the families. So you're every counterpart that's involved, you're touching them with your job. And so I think
it was what I didn't have. And like my parents even say today, if they had a company like NOCD at the time, I don't think we would have spent 6 years trying to grasp
sort through it.
Exactly of what is this? We finally get a diagnosis, like all of that.
Yeah.
And now how do you find treatment? It was just like pulling teeth back then.
Yeah. And I remember watching like Oprah interviews for OCD, and it was more stuff like people were putting countless things in the refrigerator or hoarding and that kind of stuff. But it wasn't from the description that you have introduced us to. And it also, like, Oprah, I feel like, did a great job of always covering mental health issues from different angles, from the family and from the people who were actually dealing with them and all of that. But this book has been eye-opening, and even sitting down and talking to you about your real life accounts has been eye-opening. I actually want to read a part in your book because we talk about how your family has been able to support you.
Yeah.
But I do want to talk about, there was a time when you didn't necessarily recognize, or there was just like some
animosity.
Yes. Or some turbulence there.
Turbulence.
Yes. Turbulence, I think, is the best way to put it.
Yep.
You say here, I would pick up my phone to call my parents, only to be stopped in my tracks by obsessive thoughts of what would happen if I called them. I often wouldn't talk to my parents for days, ignoring their calls and not calling them just because of the intrusive thoughts I would get as I picked up the phone. I highly regret the memory of not staying close in contact with my parents that first year in college. It only made me worse. To think of what they must have thought, the worries they must have had. I remember being able to pick up my phone one day and hearing my sweet daddy on the other end say, "Kerry, are you all right? You never call us anymore. You never stay in touch. I miss my baby girl." And I almost want to sit here and cry.
Yeah.
Because I have a 2-year-old, and I think about like what our relationship is going to look like with her as a teenager. Okay, I'm not going to cry. I'm going to pull it together, y'all. With her we're going to laugh for a second because I don't want to cry. But with her as a teenager, and then as a young college woman, and then now like I assume you're in your 30s. I don't know.
I am. Yeah.
I'm also in my 30s.
Mm-hmm.
I just wonder what those parent to child relationships look like after, because essentially when you become a parent, you're growing up with your kid too. Like your parents had never been here before.
No.
So they never had a daughter who was dealing with something of this magnitude. So what is that? When he says, Kerry, are you okay? I'm just like, whoo! We're all gonna cry in here.
Yeah, I think that in order to answer that, I have to step back a little bit, because while I have absolutely described that it was thankfully my parents that were supportive, they were supportive in helping me get help. However, respectfully, they were not supportive in what my symptoms were.
Recognizing your challenges and dealing with it.
Right. Yeah. And I think part of that is because my father is a surgeon and he doesn't have much empathy. He'll tell you that himself. He has to be ice cold in order to
do his job.
Exactly. So when I started, he doesn't deal with anything that doesn't make sense, that's not black and white. So my dad and I struggled the most. And the reason why that is such a triggering sentence is because our relationship today is not the same, I think, because of what I put them through. And I think if we had the awareness that we have today, it would have been different. But back then, they really thought I was just being a rebellious kid, a rebellious teenager. And but the reason I couldn't call them was because I have a type of OCD, a subtype called magical thinking OCD. And it's basically like superstition on steroids, only you believe it with everything in you. And it's kind of this cause and effect if then. And so I would get these horrific intrusive thoughts that if I hit like my parents' numbers, like 333 or what it was, that something really bad was going to happen. And I knew and it changed all the time based on what I was going through in my life at the time. And so I would go to call them and I couldn't because my OCD wouldn't let me hit the buttons. So that's why I didn't call them. It wasn't because I didn't want to. But I don't think they didn't really come around as supportive until I got better. And I remember this like yesterday. I remember after I went through the intensive program, my parents came for like a final kind of interview with the specialist, and my dad got up and shook the specialist's hand and said, "Thank you for saving my daughter's life." Because what I don't know if we've discussed yet is I eventually became like the OCD exacerbated into tremendous hoarding and then being housebound. And
were you living with your parents at this time, or were you in college?
I was off in college, and I had all these accommodations for my OCD. So I lived alone, which was actually in hindsight the worst thing because the hoarding, I couldn't throw away food. It was horrendous. I look back now and I cannot relate to that person. But imagine, like, I think my parents came for like Christmas break or something, and I couldn't throw away like water bottles. I think I had like 150 empty water bottles in this like tiny little room and moldy food. And I was living amongst bugs, and it's all detailed in the book, but it was horrible. And I don't think that, I remember getting back to that, he got up and shook his hand and said that. And I remember this OCD specialist looking my dad in the eye and saying, "Oh, I didn't save her life. She did that." Like, give the credit where the credit is due.
Right.
And people don't really talk like that to my dad. So it was, I think, really interesting. But that just goes to show you, like, my dad thought that this guy changed my life, but I was the one who did the hard work of the ERP therapy. And for weeks and hours with this man. But it really was me. And I think I didn't even realize, like, I'm a badass. I did do this.
Girl, you ran from a burning car. Well, there's no doubt you're a badass.
So I think that was a really interesting, it just goes to show you, like, your parents are not going, or your support system, your family, your friends are not going to necessarily understand. And I don't think we can expect them to, because that expectation can also really be damaging for your relationship in the meantime.
But you were also in a place of not being able to explain it to yourself too.
Yeah.
So there's just a lot of different directions,
a lot of things
that
going
you can
on
go
there.
in. Yeah. I do want to talk back about your college experience, and I want to read another excerpt from the book. You said someone coined a nickname for me that I later learned strictly known by Crazy Kerry. How fitting. The first time I heard someone refer to me as Crazy Kerry, they said it jokingly as my friend. They thought I knew that was my nickname. I laughed it off and pretended like it was nothing. I didn't know it was an actual thing. And then as I was talking to you before we started this interview, you were like, you kind of started to accept it and you're kind of like, oh, Crazy Kerry's here to almost like cope with it. So can you talk about like these bullying attacks that were subtle in that way, but then also you mentioned that there were some way grander things that were happening to you as people saw the challenges that you were dealing with OCD.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, we're in 2008, 2009. So there wasn't social media to talk about bullying and talk. It was like very still real and raw. And it wasn't normal to like have these conversations with people or like stand up for yourself even. Right. But my OCD manifested in a way that was very physical compulsions. And so, I couldn't, with the magical thinking, again, I still had this obsession with my hair. So I stopped brushing my hair. I got dreadlocks. If you can see my hair, you can see that went probably pretty badly. We had to cut them all out, which was my biggest fear in the world. I remember people taping hairbrushes to my dorm room door and pictures of like bushy squirrels, like brush your hair. I remember one time I was in an auditorium with like hundreds of college kids and I couldn't wash my hair at the time. So it was very greasy and unsanitary. And I looked homeless and very sick. And I, in hindsight, should not have been in school at that time. But a kid who was part of this group that bullied me, they thought it would be really funny to turn around in front of this whole auditorium and say, like, what would happen if you just, I don't know, washed your hair and brushed your hair? And I remember like just sprinting out of the auditorium in tears. And then the next thing I knew, the same group who did that, they took, I don't even know how they did it with our campus security. They took all 4 rims and tires off of my car and put my car on cinder blocks in the parking lot and put it all over Facebook as like Crazy Kerry. And so I was not in on the joke until later, once I moved through the resentment of it. But I didn't know how to announce to hundreds of people, like, I have OCD. Like, they thought I was demonic, hearing voices. I would also walk really weird. I couldn't step on certain like pieces of anything on the ground. I couldn't take stairs normally. I couldn't do so many things normally. I also had so many accommodations with the school. So every time we had a test, like, I would leave the room. And so people started to pick up on like that I was just weird and crazy. They didn't know I had a real disorder and I didn't have the voice to stand up for myself during that time, which is I think why I've come back with such a vengeance.
Yeah.
And I'm like, read the book.
Here
then,
I am. Yeah.
And then, it's kind of turned into a career now. So that's all, beyond me now. But I think about, that's why I feel like putting the stuff in the book, not discussing the side of OCD that mainstream media showcases and perfectionism and cleanliness. Like, it can be literally not being able to brush your hair or take a test or walk. When just a few years prior, I could do all of that stuff. And so I want people to know, if they're experiencing intrusive thoughts like harm OCD, sexual OCD, there's so many different subtypes that people don't speak up about and suffer in silence because they're afraid someone's gonna call the cops or social services. And really, like, it could be very much OCD or a related disorder where there is effective treatment. And so I think, and I know, because a lot of the bullies have reached out to me since and said, oh my gosh, we had no idea. And it's like, oh, I know you didn't, but that doesn't make Crazy Kerry hurt any less.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you still had to go through it.
Yeah.
And so you speak of them putting things on Facebook. And so let's talk about social media and OCD for a second. And just, how do you feel that it's being portrayed on social media? Is it educational with platforms like TikTok, where people can actually just, the search engine is what people love about TikTok, and also YouTube is being able to find stories that they can relate to. So in some sense, social media may be beneficial.
Yes.
But then in some sense, it can be still a tool for bullying. So what is it?
Just like it is still a tool for bullying for anything beyond OCD and mental health. Things, cancel culture, people going off and spreading around videos that the general public think is funny, but it's actually horrific for the person who's in the video just because it went viral.
Yeah.
But in terms of like advocacy and awareness, it has completely changed the game in a positive way for OCD.
Yeah.
When I started the Obsessive Outsiders Instagram, this was years ago. There was no one talking about OCD on social. TikTok didn't exist. Instagram had just kind of launched.
It's still a taboo topic. I could not find a lot of people talking about it on the internet. So
it is.
I found a couple of TED Talks, and then I found just more clinical or more stoic information. But it wasn't conversational stuff like what we're doing right now.
Exactly.
That opens the door for just more casual conversations about it.
And that right there is why when I got better enough and I really got my life back, I had this deep rooted, I know this doesn't answer the social media question, but I had this deep guttural rooted feeling that I was like, I had to do something because everything out on the market was clinical. Every book, you go into Barnes & Noble, everything was clinical. I remember my parents trying to get resources and like, it just wasn't helpful. It was like, too clinical. And so I felt a responsibility that I made it out alive of some horrendous stuff.
Yeah.
And I felt like I needed to let people know, first of all, this is the reality of real OCD. It's not just what you've seen on the media.
Yeah.
And also there is an effective treatment out there called exposure response prevention therapy. And so now, thankfully, like in the OCD community, there are so many OCD influencers and people who are speaking up. So they're at least, and I think I'm more privy to it with the company that I work for. This is something that we do every single day and all over the world. So we really put a high emphasis in that. So it's way better than it was, but we're not where we need to be.
Yeah.
Which is why interviews like this are so important, I think, to represent.
But there's a foundation set.
I believe that there is. I do have that hope. Yes.
Yeah. And the Sweet House is helping build it. And,
to
amplify the word about it.
Yeah.
I do want to talk to you about just what your feelings are as you've grown as a person. So where you are in your life now, you just moved to Nashville.
Yep.
You are doing all these interviews. You're being so transparent. That takes a lot of courage, a lot of energy. So how are you feeling about self at this point? Do you feel like you're back inside yourself? Because we've talked a lot about what that looks like to like exist outside of yourself for so long.
Yeah.
So do you feel like you're finally at a place of stable ground?
Well, OCD is chronic, so I still have it. It just ebbs and flows different times.
Yeah.
So like I haven't done press in a couple of years. So doing so much press, like today, for example, my OCD is kind of it's come up again. And it's like, you're going to black out as soon as they start asking you questions, unless you wear these certain shoes or you're in it. Really, it's interesting to see it kind of come up.
Yeah.
I now have the tools to know I'm going to wear whatever freaking shoes I want.
And you look amazing.
And
she came with this bolo. Can you just tell
my
them
bolo
about
tie?
That? Yeah. Because I'm going to go buy it. So I'm actually going to make you the fashion influencer. You're may so be cute. An OCD influencer, but today she's a fashion influencer, you guys. She came in looking like a star with this blonde hair, and you are giving sweet. Nashville sister.
Well, I appreciate that. I don't want to make it sound like I'm cured. I think that's the biggest misconception I could come on here and say. Because of this treatment and the tools that I now have in my toolbox, I know how to still put the shoes on that my OCD doesn't want me to do. I know that if I still want a Caesar salad for lunch, even though my OCD is telling me that my next interview I'm going to screw up and I'm terrified of that, I'm still going to eat the Caesar salad because I need to prove it wrong.
Yeah.
So I still have to work on it all the time. But yes, and the reason that I wonder sometimes if I didn't have the job I have at NOCD, I've been there for 4 years now, and I never thought I'd be able to work in this industry other than write a book or be a therapist. And I didn't want to be a therapist.
What did you go to school for? We didn't talk about that.
I went to school for communication and business.
Okay.
I didn't know what I really wanted to do.
None of us do.
What I did, I actually, the reason why I just moved here is because I worked in the celebrity fashion PR in LA for years.
Yeah.
And I left that industry to publish and finish this manuscript because I couldn't handle LA anymore and the fakeness. But it was fun right out of college for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think with all of these life experiences and coming back, and I think confidence over time, obviously when you publish a book, like you have something tangible to hold and it gives you confidence. Then you start doing press and you start to realize like, oh wait, my story, like you care.
Yeah.
You know, like you don't have OCD
I genuinely
and you
care about everybody who sits in this seat.
Well, I'm sure you do.
And I was like just drawn to your energy as soon as I walked in the door today, you guys. She just has a vibrance about her. I feel like you are doing a God thing.
Thank you.
So
That's such a compliment.
Yeah. No, for real. Like literally, I think that you were supposed to be here.
Yep.
I started the show a year ago, and who knew that we would be sitting here having such an in-depth conversation about
so meaningful for your audience.
Yeah.
I hope that, and I,
for
this
your
affects,
audience, there's people who don't even know they need to hear this conversation.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. But 1 in 40 people in the United States have OCD and don't know it. So there's people listening and watching right now where
we'll find some solace in what we're saying.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You and I talked a little bit about postpartum OCD, and Sheena Shea of Vanderpump Rules coming out and saying that she had postpartum OCD, and we were talking about just postpartum anxiety and intrusive thoughts and all that stuff before we started recording, you guys. And so it's so important for us to continue having these conversations because it's like you're going through the motions, but you're seeking other people who have had the experience so that you can know that you can come out on the other side. It's not that you're 100% healed, but that there is a path to take. And so I think that's why it's so important for you to sit here and just be the beacon of hope that you are.
I think that I completely agree with that, but I think what I really would want to get across to anyone who's listening to this is not just the hope factor, because what I realized is when I wrote the book, I wrote it for the reasons I kind of described earlier, to bring awareness, education around the specific therapy. But I realized this is really interesting, once the book was published, so many people started emailing me and messaging me from all over the world. And they had reached out to me and were like, okay, it worked. Like I now know, I think I have OCD. I now know there's a specialized therapy, golden standard for OCD. Now what, Kerry? Yeah. And so I found myself in a position where I thought my job was done when I published the book. And
nope, it's open doors.
But then people were like, so I started becoming like referrals for people.
Yeah.
And that's what led me to NOCD, because I realized educating people isn't enough. I need to give, because it's great.
You've stepped into your calling is what you've done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
And it's like you thought that pastor standing on top of you was like your miracle moment, but now you're like really you've stepped into your calling.
Well, but I couldn't, I wanted other people to receive the treatment that I received.
Yeah.
And so that's what the company I work for now, I've been there for 4 years because I really believe in what they do, and they've made it so much easier. They take insurance. I know when I got treated, insurance companies didn't believe in OCD treatment. They would never have covered it. Now we accept all major insurance commercial companies. It's virtual. If I could have brought my therapist with me on a smartphone into my day-to-day life and triggers, I would have gotten better. I mean it, Jasmine, years earlier.
Yeah.
So and to know that there was a specific treatment. So that's why I'm able to now still do this, because of the company I work for, because I don't have to be a therapist now to advocate and educate and work with these families.
From experience.
Right.
Yes.
It's my experience it's the foundation.
It's invaluable.
But it's really about, okay, great. That's really great that's Kerry's story and that you overcame all of that. But how can I overcome this postpartum thoughts that I could hurt my child, which is not in alignment with my values. And it's like, that sounds like it could be OCD, because anytime you get intrusive thoughts, they're just not in alignment with who you are and what your values are, that and they're unwanted, that's typically, that distress is a sign that you might have a subtype of OCD.
Yeah. And so don't be afraid to ask for any help, and don't be afraid to like seek resources, podcasts, YouTube shows, or anything to find that that solace that you need to figure out your next steps.
And the best thing you can do, this is what makes me so excited about what I do authentically now, is I have a tangible solution that I can give people. Like if you think you have intrusive thoughts or OCD or a related condition, you can literally just go to NOCD.com, click on schedule a free 15-minute call, and the most warm and welcoming team I wish I had answers the phone and makes you there's nothing you can tell them that is surprising. That would have never existed back when I needed help. And they can get you connected to an ERP specialist. So it just gives me goosebumps that exists
the
now.
Accessibility
it's accessible, it's affordable, it's convenient on your phone. So that's why it's really cool, because it's a full circle moment for me. It's not just about the book anymore. It's about actually getting people to connect to the help that they deserve.
I love that. You do mention a Bible verse, and we're going to close with that. You say, for my thoughts are not, or God says rather, in the good book, Isaiah 55:8-9 says, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. What does that mean to you?
That is just, that's the foundation for me of that this isn't about me.
Yeah.
And for a lot of years, I did take it as if it was about me. But I realized like the word just thoughts, because intrusive thoughts and OCD starts there. I think it just helped me realize that, like you kind of said, you found your calling. To me, that verse really spoke to me, because I realized then and there that this wasn't my idea to like do all of this. I would have never chosen this path of hell for years for me to get to here. You see me now in my little bow tie and like, you're like, it looks okay now. I was completely housebound and a non-functioning human being. And so that's where the faith really comes in for me now. Now I'm in touch with that. And it's like, oh, this wasn't the power of the human race. This was God. So that's why that verse is so important to me. And
I think it's just so important, to absolutely hand it over to a higher power, to hand it over to God, because it's not like it's all orchestrated and on time by God.
Perfect timing.
Yeah, perfect timing. Well, thank you so much, Kerry Osborn, for sitting here and just allowing us to take a deep dive through your journey in just a few minutes. But you guys, make sure you check out the Obsessive Outsider, because her journey, as she mentioned, is way more in depth than like we can even sit here and talk about. And it's really inspiring as someone who's dealt with OCD, or if you know people, or maybe you don't know anybody, or maybe it is you. I feel like this is a great resource. Also check out NOCD and all of the resources that they have, NOCD.com. And thank you so much again for stopping by the
allowing this platform for me to come on here and talk about that, to expand this even further. Like that's part of the solution right there.
That's my calling.
That's your calling. So thank you. It's an honor.
Thank you.